Good day, beautiful people, and welcome to Life Treasures and Golden Moments, the podcast that shares with you two stories of miracles and stories of inspiration. This is Natalie Silva. I hope everybody's doing well out there today. And today I'd like to dedicate this podcast to America and wish everyone a happy 4th of July. The stories that I'm going to share with you today were written by two authors from two different countries, and how they see America and Americans. And I thought you might enjoy seeing it from their point of view. And the first one is called The 60-Year-Old Little Girl, and the author is Mark Rickaby. Like most Americans, I'm baffled by why so many people in other countries dislike America. I usually write it off to jealousy of our success, not because I'm arrogant, but because I've visited many other countries and I can see the difference. I also usually point out that most of the world dreams about living in America, and very few Americans are trying to leave. Of course, the option Americans have to go somewhere else if they want to is another basic freedom denied to many from around the world. I once had a long conversation with a man in Maris, Turkey, who thought America was too aggressively militarily and too imperialistic politically. I argued that America is the only country that ever fought wars with nothing in it for them. For instance, World War II in Bosnia, to name two. And that America is the only country that not only didn't occupy countries it defeated, but rebuilt what it destroyed, like Japan, Germany, Iraq, and so on and so forth. I was in my early 20s the first time I encountered hatred of America. I had just graduated from college and was living and working on a farm of a friend in Aldershot, England. I had been there for about a week when her mother arrived home from a business trip and made dinner for us. It didn't take long before she launched into a tirade, all-out attack on America. I didn't immediately spring to America's defense for two reasons. First, she was over 60, and I was still young enough to be a little intimidated by aggressive older people. Secondly, I had been influenced by ultra-liberal college professors who had successfully muddled the patriotism I felt before starting college, insisting that Americans had much to feel guilty for. They ridiculed students who dared to disagree with them. This left me not only wondering if their criticisms of America was true, but also less likely to question authority, which is ironic because questioning authority is one thing most of those same professors obstinately promoted. Apparently, they were referring to authority only outside of their classrooms. So there I was in that English farmhouse, sharing a bottle of wine with my friend's mother and listening to her run down America in every way possible. Her speech was obviously well rehearsed, as if she had said it 1,000 times. I felt like I was back in college. I can't recall every point she made that night. All I remember, and all that really matters, is how the conversation ended. We had been talking for about 2 hours, because she was a very pedantic and difficult woman to have a civil discussion with, and for the reasons mentioned above, her age and the confusion college had left me in with, I let her do most of the talking. Maybe it was my silence that caused her to suddenly change, and maybe it was the wine, but she said, "Okay, so that's what I don't like about America. Would you like to know what I do love about it?" After such a tirade, I eagerly said yes. "I love America," she continued, "because when something goes wrong in the world, people look to America for help. They don't look into the reporters' cameras clutching their children in their arms and barely alive from the war or starvation of some natural calamity and demand help from other countries. It's always America, as if America is obligated to help everyone everywhere. And America always shows up, whether there's something in it for them or not. America leads the charge. In fact, most other countries wait to see what America will do before deciding if they're going to do anything. So despite your country's mistakes, it is still the beacon of light to the world that it has always been. And it is still the greatest hope for mankind." She went on to tell me about a faint memory she had from her childhood of her mother holding her and waving to American GIs passing through the London during a victory parade the day World War II ended. One of them smiled at her and handed her a candy bar. She watched as her mother hugged him and cried into his chest like they were old friends. Other GIs played with children. They were hugging, kissing, waving, and cheering everywhere. To say it was a happy day doesn't even begin to do it justice, she said. It was like being awakened from a nightmare. She talked about the nights she and her parents hid in air raid shelters and how they sat huddled in fear, listening to the dull thuzz of Nazi bombs falling on buildings and in the distance, not knowing if their home or their friends would be there when she returned. So many buildings were on fire, she said. It was like an aerial view of hell. Her eyes welled up with tears as she told this story. She even sobbed a little when she finished, as if she knew she was contradicting all of her previous criticisms, or that the weight of what she just said reduced them all to the point of irrelevancy. Then this formerly impetuous Englishwoman softened, smiled at me, and asked, "Can I give you a hug?" Again, this may have been inspired by her secret love of America, or the wine, or both. But I was glad to accept it, either way. We embraced for a few seconds, and I went to pull away, but she held on a little longer. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't me she was hugging. She was hugging that GI who gave her candy 50 years earlier and let her and her mother know the nightmare was over. As I have remembered that night over the years, I've wondered if her cynicism about America stemmed from disappointment in policy decisions since World War II that didn't rise to the levels of honesty, goodness, and integrity personified in that GI. The soldier who was hardly more than a boy himself and who had just witnessed mankind as its worst, but still managed to kneel down and smile warmly at a little girl and gave her candy. Maybe he set the bar too high for our country to live up to. Men of the greatest generation could do that. I've known a few of them, but they were a hard act to follow, not only in the terms of courage, but also of integrity and goodness. Whatever it was that compelled her to traverse the spectrum from hate to love that night, that hug taught me more about America and its perception around the world than all those college professors combined. And despite the times America has stumbled, I have seen my country just the way she described it, as a beacon of light for the world and mankind's greatest hope ever since. This next story is called Let Freedom Ring, and it was authored by Peter J. Green. Freedom is the oxygen of the soul. I was born in Canada. We lived in Toronto, about 80 miles from the U.S. border crossing, and in the 1960s, much of our television was received from America. Our parents took us all through the U.S. on camping trips, and we visited many beautiful and exciting destinations. American history was my favorite subject. However, it wasn't until I began living in the U.S. nearly 14 years ago that I had fully understood the most fundamental treasure that America held, freedom. I am a Canadian by birth, who is proudly and fiercely an American by heart. It began with my mother. She was born and raised in England and lived in London during World War II. Suffering through the Blitz, she and her family watched as England's despair and desperation turned to confidence with the arrival of millions of American soldiers, sailors, and airmen. My father was in the Royal Canadian Air Force, serving alongside British and American service personnel. Dad held and still holds Americans in high regard. But my mother, she openly wept in joy for all that America meant to her and her family. If anyone had anything bad to say about America, and it was the 60s, so you often heard such comments in Canada, she would say, "You can never comprehend the marvel of people who would come to our soil and die for our freedom." She often stated that she loved how Americans truly cherish freedom and willingly give their lives to preserve it. My dad taught me that in the United States, a person might completely disagree with your point of view, but disagree or not, they would willingly and gladly die to preserve your freedom to express it. Freedom might seem like a strange thing to cherish, but believe me, the rest of the world desires the freedoms that Americans fought to gain and preserve. I have learned that in America, I have the freedom to be as successful as I am willing to work for, or as unsuccessful as I choose to be. Oh, sure, there are issues and problems that still plague us, but our country is predicted on freedom. I am a musician, and last year began playing at a Catholic church in Buffalo, New York, where a vast majority of the congregation is comprised of newly arrived immigrants from all around the world, including a large number from Myanmar and Africa. We celebrate our service with songs and readings in many languages. It is a celebration of the diverse cultures that have come to this great nation and embrace the freedoms that they now have. Today I see people from African and Asian nations, just as 150 years ago America welcomed Irish, Italian, German, and Polish immigrants. Yet when I speak to any of these congregants who came from around the world, their pride at being American is so powerfully evident. They love their new nation, just as I love mine. Recently, I was driving in New Jersey near the Hudson River, and I looked up and noticed that the Statue of Liberty was standing proudly in the sunlight. I was so joyful at the sight, and I said to myself, the most beautiful woman on earth. She has welcomed so many who sought freedom and a new life. She is a symbol of that freedom, and she announces it proudly every day. As a Canadian, I cherish the relationship that my home nation has had with the United States. We stood together in World War I and World War II. Canadians served alongside Americans in the Korean War. Canada was alongside the U.S. in the First Gulf War and has been serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Canadian soldiers stand with the U.S. today in Afghanistan. Canada may have 1/10 the population, but we have a heart that echoes that of our larger brother to the south. When the tragedy of 9/11 compelled passenger jets to divert from American airports, many landed at Canadian cities along the East Coast. And the stranded travelers were welcomed and cared for by the Canadians. This is a testimony to the deep respect and love that Canadians feel for the United States and its people. We, as Canadians, know that America has been our steadfast ally and friend throughout our 149th year history as a nation. Growing up, I was taught to follow the news and current events. It always amazed me that when a disaster struck somewhere in the world, earthquake, storms, floods, disease, or man-made disaster, the American Relief Services were the first to go in and help. I learned from an early age to love and respect Americans, and that later in life I had the opportunity to become one. And I am honored beyond words to be here. I have embraced the freedom of being who I want to be, who I feel I am called to be, with only myself to answer to, and a society that simply asks me to defend the freedom of others as passionately as they will defend mine. One day soon I will undertake the citizenship test and become a full American citizen. I look forward to this not because of what America can do for me, but because of what I can do for others as an American. There is a good and bad in all peoples and in all nations. America is no exception. What sets America apart is a set of freedoms that are protected and intended to protect the society that upholds them. Freedom of speech, assembly, and the press, to name just three. I have been around the world, and those freedoms are not guaranteed anywhere as they are in the United States of America. Want to know how good we have it in America? Visit an American embassy, a consulate, in a poor nation, and look at the faces of those who are lined up to seek entry to the United States. What they want, well, it is what we have. We must always remember we also have an obligation to protect it and to preserve it. Those anxious faces may someday soon arrive and join us in upholding that obligation. Let freedom ring every day. Let it start in your heart as it beats in the greatest nation on earth. God bless America. This is Natalie Silva with Life Treasures and Golden Moments. Until next time, take care and may God bless.